You're watching the Oasis Focus and Finance show, brought to you during this month of Ramadaan. We are currently demystifying and simplifying the world of finance. If you have any questions, on screen is our SMS line and email address. We go back to our special guests, investment analyst Fahad, Shaikh and Daniel King, talking about the South African economy in terms of global trends.
Now, earlier on, we spoke about the South African economy, the global economy. We also touched on the issue of Eskom and what that really means to all of us. There's a sense of vulnerability amongst those issues that you may be pretty concerned about as well. So Daniel, you know, viewers watching have investments. Since we're now talking even in a city of Cape Town or Joburg or PE level, but there's also the macro investments. You know, how do we protect, how does South Africa protect its investments, considering that in the light of all the things we've said, there's an air of vulnerability, isn't it?
Yes, I think you're right. In the international investment community, at least, there is a perception that South Africa's debt and deficit position is quite vulnerable. And because the rand as a currency is quite a liquid, easy to trade currency, we tend to bear the brunt of any emerging market pressure that arises in response to a tightening of financial conditions, for example, globally. So what our policymakers can do in the near term to offset that would be to stabilize their own debt trajectory as a short-term solution. That's the reason why we're seeing, especially in recent budgets, more effort to consolidate the budget balance.
And when we say stabilize
yes.
their own debt trajectory, what does that mean? That
means essentially spending less and taxing more at the end of the day.
And some may say, ouch, but carry on.
Yeah. So that really is what is underpinning this fiscal consolidation that we're looking at over the next 3 years. The sustainability of the deficit, the budget deficit, is a big issue when international investors are looking at the investment grade of a specific country. The second thing that we can do over the longer term is to reduce our external vulnerabilities. So, for example, our current account deficit, which really reflects the fact that we require external funding to finance our own investment needs, could be better addressed through various competitive reforms, which we've discussed in terms of electricity and infrastructure, but also things like immigration reform, filling the skills deficit through those means. Would be critical to narrowing that current account deficit, that funding requirement over the long term. And secondly, a stimulation of our own household savings market. According to the Reserve Bank, savings in South Africa, household savings, have been close to 0% for almost a decade now. And that means that we require foreign savings to fund our own infrastructure requirements. To the extent that we can offset that with domestic savings, it would make our country a lot less vulnerable to capital flows. Okay. Those are some of the things.
Let's definitely bring it to the investor, to the viewer. You know, many people are investing in their personal capacities. People watching probably are owners of SMMEs. Should they be concerned about this? What should they be doing to protect their investments?
I think Daniel raised an important point. Firstly, there's some steps that governments can take to shield the South African economy. And then as individuals or business owners or general people in South Africa, there are certain steps that you can take to make sure you're less vulnerable. Having a higher savings rate doesn't just help the economy, but even from an individual or a business point of view, that's very positive. To give you a very simple example, if people increase their saving rate, they're less vulnerable when inflation increases. They're less vulnerable when interest rates, for example, start to increase. So I think in personal capacities, people can do a lot.
And what happens when they can't? And I'm sure you hear this, to say, I want to save, I know it's important, I know what benefits is, I simply cannot.
Look, there are obviously two sides of the equation. Saving is dependent on how much you're spending. So at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we're spending within our means and ensuring that we're building our long-term wealth, regardless of how small that saving might be. I think one of the key things we look at from an investment point of view for our clients is to be able to ensure that they're able to achieve over the long term, real wealth creation, which is, investment growth ahead of what inflation is growing at. So what you need to ensure is that you need to try and save, reduce your expenditure, try and save more, and then make sure that investment is properly diversified and invested in the right avenues to ensure that you get that protection against inflation over the long term. From an Oasis point of view, I mean, the things that we've been looking at, we spoke about a few negatives, we spoke about a few opportunities. But our view has been very consistent ever since inception, is that you need to invest in companies which have strong competitive advantages. You need to invest in companies which are market leaders with strong management teams. And it's our job as analysts at Oasis to find those opportunities. And the idea really is you want, economies will always move in a cycle. There'll be ups and downs. What you want to invest in are companies which are able to deliver a sustainable return through that cycle.
Which basically what you're saying is you need confidence, right? How important is that? You know, just confidence on a macro level in the global economy, and then confidence in a country, even for an investor.
No, it's incredibly important. I mean, at each level of society, from the public sector right down to the household, confidence makes a big difference in investment behavior and savings behavior at the end of the day. And as we've discussed, that savings behavior has not only positive macroeconomic benefits in terms of your vulnerabilities, but also from an individual perspective, it serves as another source of wealth, another source of income, so that you can better withstand shocks like losing your job or a sharp increase in inflation. So it plays a role across all levels of society.
We spoke earlier about immigrants, and I'm very concerned or curious to know your thoughts around entrepreneurship and whether South Africa as a country is absolutely on side in driving entrepreneurship. I know there's the new Small Business Ministry, it's a few months old, but is there enough to turn people in from what I call incidental entrepreneurs who become entrepreneurs because they're unemployed versus professional entrepreneurs where that's the planned career?
Yeah. I think from a top-down perspective, a macroeconomic perspective, definitely more could be done in terms of policy drives. Our environment is not as enabling as it could be for entrepreneurs. Things like immigration reform that you touched on, again, I think could be a very beneficial to South Africa over the long term. If you look at South Africa's skills deficit, relative to other countries, we sit quite far off the skills income curve. So for our level of income, our achievement in things like mathematics and science at the student level is not where it should be. And what you can do with immigration reform by attracting that talent into the country is that you allow the economy to advance up the income curve towards an advanced economy. Without that kind of reform, that attraction of skills and entrepreneurial skills, you're not going to be able to make that advancement.
It's such an important, I think it's a very important one, it's a very interesting one as well. Fahad, your thoughts on that? You see, some may say, that's great, you're going to import skills that you don't have, and if that's going to aid the country, that's great. But in the short term, many people could be rather myopic in saying, well, that means I'm out of a job, or my child's out of a job. How do we rationalize that part with importing a skilled immigrant that would possibly keep somebody else out of a job?
I think there are two angles to it. Firstly, when you're importing skills, you're bridging a skill gap in the very short term. And then secondly, it actually forces local, and it's not just a South African thing, we've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in the UK and the US. It actually forces your local residents to be more efficient. It gives you an incentive to actually upskill yourself to make sure that you can compete. And at the same time, by bringing skills in, you can develop your own human capital in terms of skills transfer from the people that are coming in. But I think that's one side of it. That bridges maybe the short-term side of short-term skill gap. But over the longer term, we also need to look at the number of students that are coming out of South African universities. I mean, if you look at it over the last 10 years, just the number of students coming out of universities has increased substantially. So while that might not bridge the short-term gap, because people coming out of university still need to skill up, but over the long term, that will also help to bridge that skill gap that Daniel spoke about. But I think from an immigration point of view, if you look at, coming back to your initial question, if you look at countries like UK, if you look at Europe, if you look at the US, they've all benefited greatly from that trend.
From immigration.
Yeah, people moving into those skills, coming into those countries as well. And I mean, it helps productivity. And it actually drives productivity across the board within those economies.
Daniel, this is not so much an immigration question as opposed to a township question. How important is the growth of South Africa's economy for us to upskill our township economic capacity?
It's incredibly important. There's an age-old debate about the relationship between education and income. And that debate is ongoing, but the consensus is that higher education outcomes are directly linked to better wage outcomes, for example, through the productivity channel. So to the extent that our education system could do a lot better, it will have a major impact on the long-term outlook for South Africa from an economic perspective and from a socio-political perspective, improving the long-term stability of the South African economy and sustainability of the South African economy.
And we've come to the end of this week's show. A special thanks to our guests, Mr. Adam Ibrahim, Oasis CEO, Fahad Shaikh, and Daniel King, investment analysts. Next week, we'll be focusing on wealth building and Islamic investment. Our guests will include Oasis CEO, Mr. Adam Ibrahim, wealth managers Mansour Mir, Ibrahim Rawat, and Naweed Ashtikar. For more information about Oasis and any of its products, you can call 0860 100 786 or email info@oasiscrescent.com. Until next time on Focus on Finance, I'm Shafiq Morton. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.